Good morning. We'll start shortly. We're going to allow everyone to connect here for the next minute or two, and then the webinar will begin. Thanks for joining us. Still looks like we have a few people joining, so I think we'll begin in about 1 minute. Okay, good morning. Thank you for joining us. We are happy to present this webinar titled, What's in a Drop of Water? Debunking the Myths of Surrounding Tap and Bottled Water. My name is Patrick Versluis. I'm the Director of Water Quality here at the Orange County Water District. Today's webinar is the first in a series that the Orange County Water District plans to present on various water issues and water topics that affect the Orange County Water District and many of our agencies and program partners. We go through a little agenda here for the webinar. So some of the housekeeping, we have the Q&A panel that each attendee should have access to. So we are going to have everyone on mute, and if you have a question at the end of all the presentations, you can either raise your hand or enter the question into the Q&A panel. We have assistants on the webinar that will help us to answer those questions at the end of all the presentations. At this point, we're going to keep the webinar moving. We have several presenters that I will introduce shortly, and we are going to cover the topic of looking more closely at information related to tap water and bottled water, specifically here in Orange County. This webinar is going to be recorded, so this will be available on the Orange County Water District website. We will have a water webinar page that you can access this recording and review it at your leisure as well. So with that, I think I will introduce our speakers. I get the pleasure to introduce our first speaker, which is myself. I am Patrick Versluis. I'm the Director of Water Quality here at the Orange County Water District. I've worked here at the Water District for over 17 years, and I oversee a lot of our water quality monitoring programs. We perform many proactive, comprehensive water quality programs, looking at drinking water wells, looking at various forms of managing groundwater, and even surface water that affects the recharge of that groundwater. We also perform a lot of monitoring on our groundwater replenishment system treatment facility. It's an advanced water purification facility that takes water from the Orange County Sanitation District and purifies it to beyond drinking water standards to be used as water to recharge our groundwater basin here in Orange County. Our next speaker is Oliver Pacifico. He is with the local branch here in Orange County, the Santa Ana branch of the State Water Resources Control Board, Division of Drinking Water. He has been with the DDW for over 18 years, with the last 13 years being as the district engineer here. He previously worked with the Golden State Water Company as a water quality engineer. And he is a licensed engineer with chemical engineering, and also a master's degree in civil engineering as well. Our last presenter will be Rick Zimmer with Eurofins Eaton Analytical. He's a senior account manager with Eurofins. He looks at and deals with lots of programs and partners related to potable water testing in the laboratory, deals with customers in California, Hawaii, a lot of the Pacific region. And he also deals with regulatory committee with the American Water Works Association, the California, Nevada section. So we have a lot of good presenters today to share a lot of information related to tap and bottled water. And with that, we will move on, and I will begin our first presentation. But actually, we do have a few polls that we're going to take, and our public affairs will help us start the polls just to get to know the audience first before the presentation. So with that, I think we will offer a poll. And if you take the chance, we'll give about 30 seconds to answer these questions before we get on the presentation. So once everything gets answered, we will see the results from the poll, looking at what the attendees report as drinking tap water. So looking at it, looks like many of the attendees do, over 50% do drink tap water all the time. We also have some that also drink filtered water or occasionally. As far as bottled water, many do have occasionally, over 42% say occasionally for drinking bottled water, and 43% actually say they rarely drink it. So that's just a good idea of what our current audience has. Here's another poll that we're going to look at just to get to know the audience and look at, as we inform the audience. This is another poll I am concerned about, and here's several topics that we will look at. Okay, so in the poll I am concerned about, looks like the quality of my water supply is the top, and that's a big focus of these presentations today, is looking at the quality of the various water supplies. Also looks like the cost and availability are also a big one, and also environmental impact is actually the second most concern. So we'll continue to ask one more poll related to tap and bottled water. I consider myself, as far as knowledge related to the topics. So as far as knowledge, the attendees have shown that I consider myself somewhat informed is the most, some well informed, and looks like little bit of the audience is more uninformed. But the goal of this presentation will be to hopefully increase the amount of knowledge that all of our attendees have related to specifically the quality and the regulations and testing required for tap and bottled water. So now we will move on, and we will start the first presentation of 3 presentations today. So I'm going to look at mainly our local supply for tap water. and move on to a little bit of background on the Orange County Water District and how we are involved in the local water supply here in Orange County, and then discuss some of the water quality monitoring that's performed that is related to much of the tap water that flows through many systems, water systems in Orange County. Then we'll talk a little bit about other additional water quality monitoring that is performed here in Orange County, in the groundwater basin and other sources as well. So this slide is very busy, but it's a good representation of how complex the water supply situation in Orange County is. One of the primary sources, as was discussed, is highlighted in the red box, with the Orange County Water District managing the groundwater basin here in Orange County, in the north and central portion at least, where that provides over 75% of the water supply for over 2.5 million people here in Orange County. And that is a key source of water that supplies tap water to many agencies and customers in the north and central portion, which is highlighted over here in the other red box on the right. And so that is a big portion of the water supply here in Orange County, in the north and central parts. In South Orange County, there is less groundwater available, so much of that is the imported water supply. And Oliver will actually discuss that a little bit more in depth as far as the imported water supply as well, and some of the information related to how we look at the water quality and provide information related to tap water quality here in Orange County and in California in general. So for the Orange County Water District, it was formed back in 1933 by the California legislature to manage the Orange County groundwater basin. As I mentioned, that is an important source of water for many cities and water agencies here in Orange County. We also protect rights for the Santa Ana River, which flows through Orange County from the upper Santa Ana River watershed and is a source for recharge into the groundwater basin here in Orange County. There are over 19 large water agencies that produce water. We call them producers, and they pump water from the groundwater basin to serve their customers in their various cities. You can see a list of the large water systems on the left, cities like Anaheim, Boynton Park, Newport Beach, City of Orange. All those cities do pump a large portion of their water from the groundwater basin. There are over 21 separate water systems that are serviced, some of them serviced by the same agency, servicing multiple water systems in different areas of the groundwater basin. In addition, we do have 10 small water agencies, some of them transient systems, as you can see, things like Knott's Berry Farm and the Los Alamitos Racetrack, which do have populations that do come through those areas, and they do have groundwater sources available for their water supply. As we mentioned, over 2.5 million people are being served water from the groundwater basin, and it's a key source of their water supply. And it can serve over 77%, up to 77% of their water supply for those various water agencies. So as far as groundwater basin replenishment here in Orange County, the Orange County Water District continues to work to have a very diverse portfolio to ensure that that groundwater basin can supply that large percentage of water to the customers here in Orange County. And so there are sources like natural recharge from that rain, the Santa Ana River. When we do get storms, that water can be a large percentage of water that can get into the groundwater basin. In addition, I mentioned the groundwater replenishment system. That advanced water purification facility does have a large portion of the water of our portfolio coming from that source that is actually a continued source throughout the year. And so we perform a lot of operations to maintain that treatment facility and maintain recharge facilities to get that water into the ground as another source. In addition, there is imported water that is purchased from the Metropolitan Water District, which may came from Northern California and or the Colorado River, to have additional sources available to replenish the groundwater. There are a lot of facilities that make up the operations for the Orange County Water District. This map shows many of our different facilities, such as the seawater intrusion barrier at the bottom left. That is where we inject water to prevent seawater from intruding into the groundwater basin and potentially causing groundwater to not be usable for drinking water purposes with the high salt and salinity. So that seawater intrusion barrier has been operated going back to the 1970s and continues to inject highly pure water into that area. In addition, we operate recharge basins, which are at the top center of the map, which also take water from the groundwater replenishment system in addition to the Santa Ana River water that is actually percolated in that area as well. So this is a nice cross section of the groundwater basin here in Orange County. Obviously, this is broken into three basic areas: the shallow aquifer, the principal aquifer, and then the deep aquifer. And the majority of the drinking water here in Orange County is pumped from that middle section, the deeper section of the principal aquifer. And that is an area where you can see there are layers, these aquitars, which are areas of clay that actually prevent water from the shallow to really getting down there, except for in areas where we recharge, which we call the forebay section, where you can see there's a little less clay layers, which allows the water to recharge down into those deeper depths, especially into the principal aquifer where a lot of that drinking water is pumped from. There's a lot of water quality monitoring that is performed here in Orange County. As the Director of Water Quality, I oversee a lot of programs and manage a lot of staff that are consistently performing a lot of that water quality monitoring. During the COVID crisis, we were an essential program that maintained most of our operations and continued to perform a lot of water quality monitoring, and working with our laboratory on site, maintain all of our water quality monitoring related to drinking water and additional groundwater monitoring to protect that groundwater source. So as I mentioned, we do a lot of water quality monitoring related to the drinking water wells for a lot of those agencies, those producers we call them, that pump the water from the groundwater. And we've continued a lot of monitoring for them. We have a lot of groundwater monitoring programs throughout the groundwater basin to look at things like the seawater intrusion and other areas where we know there may be other concerns for groundwater, things like nitrate or other industrial areas that we want to continue to monitor in the groundwater basin. We also monitor the Santa Ana River and other surface water sources, which we know flow and can recharge into the groundwater to maintain quality there. And then, as I mentioned, we have the groundwater replenishment system, which produces a large portion of the water that is recharged, and we maintain a lot of comprehensive monitoring for that source as well. So some of the drinking water monitoring that we do, I mentioned the groundwater production wells, the drinking water wells that are pumping groundwater. And we also do some testing for these producer systems in various reservoirs, into the distribution system at times, and also for things like the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, which is required by the US EPA to monitor unregulated contaminants that they are looking at potential water quality standards in the future. And so we perform a lot of that related to Title 22 drinking water standards here in California. And we work very closely with Oliver, who will be speaking next at the Division of Drinking Water, to help a lot of those water agencies maintain very proactive, comprehensive programs for water quality monitoring in their drinking water and other sources here in Orange County. This is a map showing over the 200 wells that are used for drinking water production and pumping water out of the ground. And as you can see, they're spread throughout a good portion of the basin. Obviously, you can see on the coast, we don't have a lot of pumping due to that seawater potential for seawater intrusion, but there are groundwater wells that are used for drinking water throughout the basin. And the Orange County Water District works with those various water agencies to maintain and perform all of the required testing that Division of Drinking Water has on a regular basis. Some of the testing that we do, this is related to Division of Drinking Water maximum contaminant levels, MCLs. You can see that there are quite a few compounds and minerals that have to be tested on a regular basis. And as I mentioned, we work really closely with Division of Drinking Water to routinely follow these, maintain all the testing, and much of this is performed in-house here at our Orange County Water District laboratory. This is an additional list. We perform a lot of testing for volatile organics, other inorganic compounds, in addition to secondary standards, things that are more aesthetic, things like color and odor, in addition to other metals and various parameters such as specific conductance, which kind of looks at the salts that are in the water as well. So we have a lot of different parameters that are being tested to monitor these various sources in the groundwater, which, as we mentioned, ends up producing quite a bit of the tap water here in Orange County. There's a lot of reporting that is required, a lot of regulations that here at Orange County Water District and a lot of the water agencies are very closely following as things change and requirements are updated. One of those primary sources of reporting for drinking water monitoring is the Consumer Confidence Report or the Annual Water Quality Report. I know that Oliver will discuss this in a little more detail, but Orange County Water District is heavily involved in providing all of the necessary water quality results and data to perform that reporting and ensure that all the customers and water agencies have all the information available to understand the water quality of all the different sources here in Orange County. We also have various reports such as the public health goal reports, PHG exceedance reports, looking at public health goals, which are very low levels, looking at levels of contaminants that show no potential human health risks. And those are performed by the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA. And we look at those and help all of our water agencies perform additional reporting to inform both their agencies and the customers. We also work very closely with the Division of Drinking Water and Oliver and his staff to look at monitoring waivers, vulnerability assessments, looking closely to ensure that all the monitoring is performed and additional parameters are tested as needed. So I mentioned a lot of groundwater monitoring is being performed, as this is a primary source for drinking water and tap water here in Orange County. We have a lot of programs, as I mentioned, going throughout the seawater intrusion area, the coastal area, in addition, various areas in the North Basin and South Basin of the groundwater basin here in Orange County. El Toro is a little sub-basin that we monitor very closely, has the El Toro Marine Corps Air Station, and we work very closely with the Navy and other agencies to follow that area as well. There are a lot of monitoring all spread throughout the basin, and I have several maps to show how extensive those groundwater monitoring networks are. This map shows a lot of the monitoring wells that are related to a lot of our different programs to monitor the quality of groundwater all throughout the basin. And a lot of these are either single point or what we call nested sites, where there's multiple casings that are drilled deep into the ground to various depths to maintain a very extensive and comprehensive water quality monitoring of the groundwater, in addition to all those wells that are being tested for specific drinking water for the various agencies. This map shows another network of monitoring wells. These are multi-port West Bay wells, we call them. And these can go very deep, sometimes several thousand feet deep into that deeper aquifer here in Orange County. And they give us a very good snapshot at various depths in the groundwater to monitor closely what's going on at various depths in specific locations. And these have provided us a lot of good information in various areas. Sometimes in that deeper part of our basin, we can get very good water quality data from those wells as well. I also mentioned that we do monitor a lot of the surface water, as that is one of the sources that is used for recharge into our groundwater basin. The Santa Ana River flows right through the middle of Orange County, especially the upper north central portion. And we monitor that on a regular basis, sending our staff to various locations, primarily below the Prado Dam, also at Imperial Highway, right before water is actually diverted and recharged into the ground. We also go up and we monitor into the upper watershed, looking at what might be flowing downriver at various creeks up in the upper watershed as well. So we are very fortunate to have a laboratory on site, a certified drinking water laboratory. So we are performing a lot of monitoring here for a lot of the water agencies, testing the producer wells, the drinking water wells, performing compliance monitoring for the groundwater replenishment system, both in groundwater where water is being recharged and also in the treatment facility itself. We also perform a lot of the monitoring and testing and analysis here for the various programs that I mentioned for groundwater monitoring to ensure the quality of those various sources. And I mentioned the Santa Ana River, where we also perform a lot of that monitoring and testing here as well. So I want to thank you for this opportunity. As I mentioned, the questions and answers will be at the end of all the presentations. And I think I'll turn it over to Oliver Pacifico with the Division of Drinking Water.
All right, good morning. So my name is Oliver Pacifico. I am the district engineer for the Santa Ana office. So I'm the local representative here, for the drinking water program. And we have offices all over the state. So what we do is we regulate drinking water and recycled water. And what we mean by drinking water is, your tap water. So we specifically regulate like three types of entities. Those are all public water systems. So it may be your local water district. It could be your city water department. Oh, excuse me, I think I have to start my video here. All right. Sorry. So going back, so we regulate essentially three types of public water systems. So it may be your local water district, your city water department, or your regular or your private water company. Oops, sorry, slide. All right. So we're gonna cover a few things here. Patrick already covered groundwater, so I'll be focusing on surface water, but essentially, the requirements for both are very similar. But there's some additional requirements for surface water, and that is, for treatment. And I'm going to show later why that is. And like what Patrick said as well, our focus here is going to be on water quality, and specifically on the consumer confidence report. So I'm going to talk about how to read your consumer confidence report. And if you didn't know where to find it, I'll show you how to do that. So let's start out with the regulatory agencies. So as you can see here, there's a logo for the US EPA. So all drinking water regulations, oh, sorry, not all, but drinking water regulations in general come from the US EPA. So California has primacy for enforcing the US EPA regulations. And on top of the US EPA regulations, California may also have other drinking water regulations. Now, the water boards is under Cal EPA, and the Division of Drinking Water is one of the divisions of the state water boards. So I think Rick Zimmer in his presentation later has a slide on the regulatory process, I think that the EPA has. So I will not cover that here. Oh, sorry, my laptop is a little slow. So I wanted to show the water cycle to kind of explain, the difference between groundwater and surface water. So I said earlier, surface water needs to be treated, and this is the reason why. So as you can see on the screen, water essentially comes down as rain, and then it has to go through the surface of the land, right? Either surface runoff or snow melt, and goes to streams before it goes into storage, like in lakes and rivers. So in that process, it could pick up a lot of material. So there's a requirement to that surface water needs to be treated. So the next slide here shows where surface water, specifically in Southern California, comes from. So if you look at kind of like the top middle of the state, water comes from all the way from Lake Shasta in the north, the Sierra Nevada mountains, and the water there is brought down through the delta through the state water project. And then likewise, going to the east, we also get water from the Colorado River aqueduct. So you can see here that water takes quite a distance to be transported to Southern California. In that process, there's more opportunities for it to be impacted by contamination. So that's why there's a requirement to treat water. So the next slide I'm going to show here is just just one of the lakes for water storage. So Lake Oroville. So that's located in Northern California. So as you can see here, it's exposed in the environment compared to groundwater, which you saw in the diagram, is essentially protected from surface contamination, unless the contamination comes from some activities that could permeate down through the soil. So the next slide here is just shows the different water facilities of the metropolitan water district. So all those aqueducts I showed in the previous slide, and brings water down to Southern California, and then that water is treated at the 5 different treatment plants operated by the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. So this photo or diagram also shows kind of the distribution system that delivers water from those treatment plants to various parts of Southern California. So it includes LA, Orange County, San Bernardino, Riverside, and all the way to San Diego. So I circled here the Zimmer plant. So that's, I think most of the audience from Orange County. So our water, surface water, comes primarily from that plant. So this is just a photo of what a treatment plant looks like. So this specifically the Zimmer plant in Yorba Linda. So the next few slides are going to show a schematic for what a typical surface water treatment plant looks like. So what I want to highlight in this slide are the contaminants that we're concerned with, when it comes to surface water. So specifically, and those are viruses, bacteria, cryptosporidium, and giardia. So the treatment plant or process in this slide here is meant to specifically remove or inactivate those contaminants. So all along this process here, from the intake pipe, at the lake, all through the process, there's monitoring involved. So for example, at the lake, public water systems are required to take regular samples, to be analyzed. And those samples are taken to certified laboratories. So one of which is Eurofins, who I think Rick Zimmer is going to cover later. And then within the process itself, there are different monitoring requirements to ensure the efficacy of the treatment. And so I'll share later in the consumer confidence report how those results are to be, informed, or how to present those information to the consumer so they are aware of their water quality. And then looking at the bottom part of the slides here, you can see a storage tower and then distribution system. So even at that part of this process, there's monitoring requirements as well. Okay. So moving on to the consumer confidence report. So this is an example of a report from the Metropolitan Water District. So that was an example that, that we used, showing their system. So this was from 2019. So all public water systems are required to provide a consumer confidence report to their customers by July 1st. So it's not July 1st yet, so I'm showing you the 2019 report. And another thing to note in the consumer confidence report is that it shows you data in the circled here from the previous year. So for this year, for 2020, you'll be getting data from January to December 2019. And sometimes too, the consumer confidence report is referred to as the annual drinking water quality report, as shown in this report. So your report contains a lot of information. So I think this is a multi-page report, but I just want to highlight the section that shows you the water quality. So every consumer confidence report, like I said, needs to be sent to the customer by July 1st. And so you can get it via email. So, if you receive your water bill via email, there's typically a link to that, or you can get that in the mail as well. Or they could say a postcard with a link to your consumer confidence report. So the important part of the report that has the water quality is the table or series of tables. So, there's Patrick showed earlier a long list of contaminants, right, that they monitor for. Okay, but your report should be a much shorter list, because the requirement is for the water system to only present data on contaminants that they have detected in the water system. So essentially, if you have a very small table, that's a good sign that they didn't detect too much. So let me move on to the next slide. So, because I know you could not see this. So this is, oops, I think, oh, sorry. Let me go back to this. So one more thing I want to point out, I know it may be hard to see, but the red box includes, two things I mentioned earlier, right? The combined filter effluent turbidity. So that is the measure the efficacy of the treatments. So there's a standard for that. And then same thing, I mentioned, bacteria. So in this specific case, this is bacteria monitoring that was done in the distribution system. So in this next slide, I just want to talk about kind of like a few terms that you will see in the report. And the report also requires to have an explanation for those terms. So specifically, one is the maximum contaminant level. I'm just going to read here that essentially that is the highest allowed level in the drinking water. So that's your standard. So if your water system or if your consumer confidence report has an exceedance of the MCL is in violation, that would be highlighted on the table itself, so you'll know. And then I just want to make a distinction between MCL and MCLG. So one is the standard, the MCL, and then the MCLG is a goal. So that is the level at which that there's no known or expected health risk. And then I just want to make a distinction as well between the MCLG and the PHG. So the difference between the two is the MCLG is from the US EPA. So like I said before, they're most of the regulations come from the US EPA, and in some cases, the California. Sorry, I guess back up. So California would have primacy for for these same contaminants. So they develop a public health goal. So it may be lower in some cases than the MCLG. So that's why both are are included here in the event that California standards is lower than the EPA's. And then lastly, the treatment technique, and that just shows, like I said, that in lieu of directly monitoring for water quality, it measures the efficacy of treatment. And then just to kind of wrap this up, I guess the general question is, is your tap water safe? So, in general, the answer is yes. But if you want to know specifically about the safety of the water you drink at home or your workplace, the Division of Drinking Water created a tool to help you identify, like where you get your water from. If you don't, for example, you don't get a water bill, so you don't know who your supplier is. So when you go to the site, and I have the link later at the end of the presentation, where you just type in an address, and then a window shows who your water provider is. So in this case, your water service provider is the city of Anaheim. So if you did not, for example, find your consumer confidence report, the division also has a web page that you could go to. And again, the link is at the end of the presentation, where you just type in the name of the water system, and then you'll be able to go to the page for the water system that has a lot of information about your drinking water from that water system. So you can see in the left side towards the bottom, you have a history of all the consumer confidence reports from that water system, plus a lot of other water quality related information, including also if they've had any violations in the past. So this concludes my presentation, and I'm probably gonna leave it up here for a few seconds. So these are the links on those websites I showed earlier.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. Next, we're going to move on to Rick Zimmer with Eurofins Eaton Analytical to discuss more information related to bottled water.
Thank you, Patrick and Oliver. My name is Rick Zimmer, and I've been working with Eurofins for about 25 years. And our lab has been in business for over 30 years, based in California. And in addition to public water system testing, our firm also does a fair amount of bottled water testing. And so Patrick asked me to share some of the water quality requirements and quality requirements that pertain to bottled water that's sold here in California. On the public water system side, water systems are indirectly regulated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the state of California Division of Drinking Water has primacy to implement the EPA Safe Drinking Water regulations. And the general rule of thumb for water quality regulations is that a state must be as stringent as the federal regulations, but can opt to add additional state-specific water quality and regulatory requirements. Somewhat similar on the bottled water side, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, is the equivalent of EPA drinking water for bottled water companies and companies that are serving bottled water. And under the state agency that implements the FDA requirements is under the Department of Public Health, and that's the California Food and Drug Branch. The California Food and Drug Branch issues a license to a bottled water company to deliver water. And so there are 6 types of these licenses, and I just want to highlight these 6 for you right now. The first is a bottled water production plant. Now, this would be a plant that is operated by a private company that is taking in water that has already been approved by a public water system. And so that water is treated further and then put in containers for public consumption. Some bottled water companies, in addition to operating a bottled water plant, also have their own private source. This could be a spring or a well source. And so there are separate licensing requirements, not just for a bottling plant, but also licensing requirements for a private source. So this would not be a source that is designated as a public water system, but a private source for purpose of generating water that can be bottled for public consumption. There is a third license, and that is a water hauler. This would be a water tank, a truck that takes water from a private water source or even a public water source, fills it in a tank, and then delivers it to a bottled water company for treatment and distribution. The 4th and 5th types of licenses are very similar, and you probably see these outside of grocery stores. This would be retail water stores or water vending machines. And so both of these entities are taking water from a public water agency that has met water quality requirements and then adding additional treatment for public consumption. And the 6th type of license is really just a distributor of bottled water. So taking that packaged water and then just delivering it to a customer. So the Food and Drug Branch issues licenses for all 6 of these type of companies. This is straight from the California Food and Drug Branch website, and I thought these 2 questions were absolutely central to the topic today. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple of items. The first is the distinction between public water, tap water, and bottled water. So the Food and Drug Branch states that the key purpose of treatment for tap water is to make the water safe, whereas the bottled water is really adding additional treatment to improve quality. And this would be improved through additional treatment. So you're taking safe water and you're really serving to improve upon the quality of that water above and beyond what is considered to be safe. And so California for public water systems has what they call secondary standards, which are really thresholds that are meant to improve the taste and odor and aesthetical properties of water. And so bottled water and vended water really is meant to do that as well. The second part of this slide that I wanted to highlight is how the standards are different. And I'll go into a little bit more detail shortly, but the basic distinction is that the Food and Drug Branch takes the FDA standards in whole and implements them in California as part of their licensing program. There is only one distinction, however, and that is that the Food and Drug Branch adheres to a lower trihalomethanes standard, 10 parts per billion, than the federal FDA standard, which is 80 parts per billion. So in issuing a license, there are several requirements that a company has to meet before they can provide their packaged water or their final water product to a customer. And some of these requirements are similar actually to the requirements that Pat and Oliver highlighted, specifically with regards to a public water systems consumer confidence report. A company that is licensed in California has to make available on an annual basis, updated a water quality report. On each individual product, there is labeling to disclose the content of the package, where it was, what is the source, where it was located, what are the ingredients, and also a contact person to follow up to request a bottled water report. So items 1, 2, and 4 are very similar to the public water systems CCR requirements. The Food and Drug Branch seeks to inspect each licensed entity at least annually to verify all of these quality requirements are met, and also to evaluate and validate the facility. This is again also similar to a requirement on the public water system side with permitting. And then finally, and what I'll kind of focus the rest of my presentation on, is the water quality testing for bottled water that is required. So in thinking of those different types of licensing entities, now the sixth one, the distributor really doesn't have any testing requirement, but the other ones do. And so if I am taking water that is from a public water system and then adding additional treatment and then serving that in a package, I'm compelled to meet this testing requirement, which is a weekly test for coliforms, and then there is an annual requirement for these chemical and radiological analyses. Very similar requirement for a public water source. So a company that has their source and also operating their treatment would be testing their source water coming in that they're using and each product that they produce with additional treatment from that source. I mentioned earlier the retail water stores and vending machines, and their requirements are much different. Now bear in mind that they're taking water that has already been tested and approved from a public water system. And so there's just requirements there every 6 months to test that vended water for coliforms. And if they're adding minerals, total dissolved salt is done on a weekly basis. The water haulers are required to test when they're hauling their water, and again, just limited to coliform analyses. Now I've put up here a summary of what is required under the public water system drinking water regulations. That's Title 22. And in California, the Food and Drug Branch regulates their requirements under the California Food and Title 21 requirements. Now, if you remember, the Food and Drug Branch is mimicking the FDA requirements, which are trying to reflect back EPA safe drinking water requirements. And so what I've highlighted here in red are those California-specific public water system testing that is not required for a bottled water company. So that's a single distinction in terms of water quality testing. In California, we have an MCL for perchlorate. We had an MCL for hexavalent chromium, and the reproposal of that MCL is forthcoming. We have an MCL for 1,2,3-trichloropropane. And so public water systems have incorporated these requirements into their routine testing, whereas on the bottled water side, because these are not federal requirements regulated by the FDA, they're excluded from their monitoring of their sources and products. I've also highlighted a category of tests which are referred to as notification level tests. And these are constituents that California has identified as where regulation might be forthcoming, but there are some health effects that are known, and so there's some threshold levels that are identified where a water system might need to take some public notification actions based on some testing results. And so these are not actually regulated across the state, but based on occurrence or other conditions in specific parts of the state. And one category of notification level tests in this list is PFAS compounds. And so Orange County has been directly impacted in monitoring for PFAS compounds and providing notification to their customers, whereas bottled water customers that are regulated according to the California requirements are not subject to any of these notification level constituents. Now, I just want to wrap up by saying that although a California license for bottled water does not compel a water company to test for things that are not regulated by the FDA, there are several other organizations that a bottled water company may be member to or utilize to test for those contaminants of emerging concern or constituents that are not yet regulated at the federal level. And so these are some examples of those associations. The International Bottled Water Association and their members adhere to their own individual model code, which is in sum a compilation of all of the state requirements. And so an IBWA member would on an annual basis test for constituents that are regulated by California or New Jersey or New York above and beyond what's regulated at the federal level. Similarly, the National Standards Foundation has a product seal of approval that some companies utilize and seek also to have more comprehensive testing. And then some companies, and I just have one example pulled up here on the right, have established their own internal quality standard for all of their products, again, based on where they sell, perhaps in multiple states or internationally, where they might incorporate model code requirements or certain state requirements, or even the World Health Organization standards for international bottled water. And so my point here with this slide is that although a minimum requirement for California bottled water companies is to basically measure for what is regulated at the federal level, some companies opt through this association or on their own to test for constituents above and beyond what is in the minimum requirement in California. And so I really thank you for the opportunity to talk about bottled water, and I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Versluis.
All right, thank you, Rick. So I will go ahead and we will move on to the questions portion of this. At this point, we want to thank everyone for listening and joining us. Hopefully we've provided a lot of information to help you to be better informed related to the extensive monitoring that's related to tap water, specifically here in Orange County. A lot of the extensive reporting and monitoring that goes into ensuring the safety of tap water. Hopefully we provided good information, and I think Rick provided a lot of good information related to how bottled water is regulated. A lot of that bottled water is actually pumped from the ground here in Orange County as well, or taken from the systems, water systems here in Orange County. And there's a lot of regulations that are related to bottled water and ensuring the safety of that as well. Here at Orange County, we focus on proactive and comprehensive monitoring, specifically here at Orange County Water District, but all the water agencies, and in addition to a lot of the regulations and requirements for the bottlers as well for bottled water. So we are going to open it up to some questions. We have a Q&A panel that can take questions, as well as if you'd like to raise your hand, our public affairs staff here will assist us in moving forward with the questions and answers. And Rick and Oliver will be available, as well as myself, to answer some questions here.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Pat, so much. So we did have a few questions that were submitted upon registration. So we will ask those questions first. If you did have a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A box if you'd like to write it in, or you may raise your hand. We are a little bit limited on time, so if we don't get to your question, we apologize. You can email us and we will be sure to follow up. That email address is info@ocwd.com. Again, info@ocwd.com. But to start it off with some written questions that were submitted previously, tap water is tested more frequently than bottled water and is much less expensive than bottled water. So how can water agencies best explain to the public that tap water is safe and bottled water is unnecessary?
Okay, well, my mic is unmuted, so I will start, and if Rick or Oliver want to jump in, you can go ahead. Obviously the safety of tap water and drinking water here in Orange County is paramount. You have a lot of ongoing monitoring, a lot of regulations. A lot of the regulations are based on very conservative health assessments related to various compounds that look at no adverse effects at all. A lot of them based on things like rodent studies to establish those levels at very low levels. And our ability to test and detect a compound is getting better and better down to things like parts per trillion, which is extremely low. So there's a lot of regulations being put out there, and all of us are making every effort to meet all those new regulations and ensure the safety of the water. I think Rick and Oliver, if you want to add to that, but it is key. We didn't touch on the cost, but the cost is one component when you discuss both tap and bottled water. And obviously tap water is less expensive, sometimes many times more, but that's one component that each person has to decide on when deciding to drink different types of water. Also the environmental cost, we didn't talk. There's other components, but we wanted to focus on the quality and show that there's a lot of effort being put into ensuring the quality of both types of water, especially tap water here in Orange County. And that's something that, like I said, myself, Oliver, and Rick can discuss in more detail if you guys would like to.
Pat, I would just like to add that there is just a heightened sense of awareness on both the public water system side and the private water company side with regard to customers' right to know and inquiries. And I think that, well, I know for certain the public water agencies have a mechanism in place to field concerns or questions specific to the water that they serve. And so similarly on the private company side, there is also a required mechanism to field those kind of questions. And there is a lot of variability both with public water systems and private water companies with regard to specific quality for a specific water, because there's different water types and there's different treatment in different locations subject to potential contaminants. And so I would just say, feel confident to follow up with those phone numbers, either in the CCR or on the product label, and ask the quality representatives of an entity, and you can get your specific questions answered.
All right, thank you. The next question has to do with RO filters, and it's two parts. Do they operate with enough pressure to remove PFAS from drinking water? And are there any health benefits or negative consequences from drinking RO water? And another similar question to that is, at what point must a well be taken out of service? And I think that may have a little bit to do with PFAS.
All right, this is Oliver. So I guess I'll try to answer the first question first about, efficacy of RO. So I guess if you're talking about, purchasing an RO unit for your home, so that's kind of like outside, like the jurisdiction of the drinking water program. So what the drinking water program does have, though, is a listing of registered devices. Essentially, it's been tested to demonstrate that they're actually, effective in what they're claiming that they could remove. So at this time, so we have a website actually that you could go to look up that list. And on the website, there's only 4 contaminants right now that are for which there are devices registered. So those are arsenic, chromium, lead, and nitrate. And then I guess to answer the second part of like when would a well be removed from service if it exceeds the PFAS level, is that correct?
Yes, and perhaps Pat can also speak to this on not serving water that may have PFAS levels that exceed certain standards. And Pat, you're on mute.
Okay, so it looks like I'm unmuted there. Yeah, so obviously, as Oliver mentioned, there are levels currently with anything related to PFAS. There are no regulatory standards established at this point. There are advisory standards with recommendations, things like response levels. And so the state has established response levels, which are prior to the establishment of an actual MCL, maximum contaminant level. At this point, response levels do have a recommendation to remove a source. And a lot of the current human health risk assessment done by OEHA is still being established. No public health goal has been established for the compounds, but many agencies in Orange County are proactively choosing to remove wells from service until better information is known on the human health risk. And in addition to taking the proactive step to actually bringing on treatment to deal with levels that we currently are aware of to ensure the safety of drinking water here in Orange County and ensure the treatment of groundwater to deal with those low levels of PFAS. So that, I think that answers most of the question there. I would reiterate Rick's comment on just ensuring that you are aware of where the water quality information is for your water source, whether it's with your city or water agency that serves the water, or if you use bottled water, requesting those reports. Obviously tap water, there's a lot of information that's required to be sent out. If you drink bottled water, it's good to follow up and get that information as well, because that information is there, and hopefully we've armed you with the information and the ability to better understand some of that water quality that is being reported for those water sources.
And we do have a lot
of question in there.
Yeah, we do have a lot of great questions coming in the Q&A, and I know we're over 11 o'clock, but we'll ask just a few more. Again, if we don't get to your question, I encourage you to please email us at info@ocwd.com. But we have a question here. Why is my water at times looking brown versus clear? And could that be a water quality concern?
Well, I can say that, you know, obviously colored water can come from various sources. You really have to look at what the source of the water is, what the premise piping, it could come from various piping in the actual house or the building, perhaps from the distribution system. So you would want to contact your water service provider, so that city or water agency. And they are usually very helpful to assist you in looking further into that, even doing testing if needed to try to find the source. Oliver, do you have something you would like to add on that as well?
No, I just want to echo what you said, Patrick, that essentially, yeah, if you have some concerns about your water supply or your water quality, you know, after investigating yourself, you know, you could definitely suggest contacting your water supplier, because I think, yeah, that'll be the best, you know, situation to help you.
Thank you both. Next question, is there an easy place online to find the water quality of a particular water bottle?
Well, I think that in line with the desire to disclose water quality on the bottled water side, if you have a particular bottled water and you look at the label, more often than not, you're not only going to find a contact and phone number, but also a website. And so if you just simply visit the website, again, very similar to the public water system side, and those companies are typically posting their water quality report portion of their California license, or just a general report of quality. So that information to a specific brand that you might be drinking is posted on the website. And on the bottled water, one company might be selling 8 or 10 or 12 or more different types of bottled waters. And so again, go to the label and look to verify who the company is that is managing that product, and follow up on their website.
Thank you, Rick. We have a question that quite a few people have actually been asking, and it has to do with the effect to water quality of bottled water and sunlight. Is there any impact from the sunlight hitting the plastic bottle?
There's been extensive testing of the plastic, the impacts of sunlight and leaching of plastic by the bottled water companies, and also through the leadership of the International Bottled Water Association. So, there's been a lot of studies and literature on that, and the bottled water companies are very conscientious as to the product that they're using and its impact on their water. So I can just say that that is something that is an important consideration for the bottled water industry. And I will say too, that once the product is delivered to a customer, if you take water from a vending machine and you take it home, or you have bottled water that you store at home, of course, at that point, that company really does not have a whole lot of control if, for example, a bottle of water is sitting out in the sun for several days or is several years old. So, but I do know that the industry is very conscious of the type and quantity and impact of a packaging material on its product.
All right, and just a few more questions to wrap up. Do you think annual testing of certain types of bottled water is sufficient from a water quality safety standpoint?
Well, the answer to that is yes, if you're asking the California Food and Drug Branch, because that is their requirement. And so I think that's a terrific question to ask a particular bottled water company, because again, some companies are taking water that's already been tested by a public water agency on their own designated frequency of testing. And so some bottled waters might be from a private source. And depending on where that source is located, there may be some additional constituents that that company is already testing. So I would just say that it does vary. But as a minimum requirement, the California Food and Drug Branch says annual testing is sufficient.
All right, and this question is related to bottled water as well. Is it true that there's no current requirement for bottled water providers to test for PFAS?
That is correct, because there is no federal MCL requiring PFAS monitoring. And so this is where the bottled water associations, such again as the International Bottled Water Association, that does have and has incorporated discussion of PFAS and addressing PFAS as it pertains to bottled water. Note too that PFAS is more of a source constituent. And so, for example, if a public water agency has tested for PFAS in its source water and not found it, and is selling that water to a bottled water company, indirectly that bottled water company has been testing for PFAS. And so, really the relevant question is, if a private bottled water source has been tested for PFAS, and that's an excellent question to ask an individual bottler.
And do you happen to know what percentage of bottled water actually comes from municipal sources?
Pat or Oliver, you might know that, but I have no idea what that percentage is in California or nationally.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an exact number. Like I said, in Orange County, I know there have been bottled water companies that have had groundwater wells, and also those that are connected to the municipal water systems as well. But as far as numbers or percentages, I can't can't provide any numbers with that.
Okay, and we have 2 more written questions here. Most CCR reports, they report water quality numbers measured on the distribution system. Can we expect similar water quality numbers when measured on the tap source?
So I guess this question is asking if a customer decides to take a water sample from their tap and then take it to a lab, would they expect the same results as what's shown in the CCR? So I guess one kind of like distinction between that one specific water sample and then the results in the CCR is that the CCR shows a range. So I guess you could expect that the water sample would be within that same range. But then the other concern issue is that the water in your tap has gone through your housing pipe. And so this kind of goes back to the question earlier about, like you're think the water being brown, right? So I said, contact your water system after you investigated it. So, essentially what you'd like to do is, to investigate is, if your tap shows is brown, check the other taps in the house to see if it's also brown. So if it's the other taps are clear and then one tap is brown, it definitely shows, just something in the pipe, leading to that tap. Or if all the other taps in the house are also brown, then, go to the outside hose bib, right? Because that's closest to the water supply from the water company. And so if that is clear, then it shows that there's pipe the piping in the house as well. And if the hose bib is brown, yeah, that's definitely when you want to reach out to your water supplier, because there could be various reasons for why it's brown. They could be doing some sort of construction at one location. You could have seared up the pipe. That's why you're seeing brown water. There could be various reasons. So again, if you take a water sample and it's brown, that probably is not going to be representative of the water that you see in the consumer confidence report. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Oliver. And I thank you to all of you who are still with us. One final question, if anyone would like to raise their hand, you may. Otherwise, please email us at info@ocwd.com if you have any additional questions. But one final question here related to water quality. And does water treatment remove viruses such as coronaviruses and COVID-19?
Yes, it does. So, the water treatment process is designed to, to remove and inactivate. Essentially, that means render harmless, like viruses, including COVID. And, to find out if you really want to, to look into that, you can go to the website of the drinking water program. So, go to the links on the slide, and then there's a section there that talks specifically about that. But yeah, the short answer is yes.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Do we have any raised hands? No, I think that's it for the questions. Then again, feel free to email us at info@ocwd.com and we can direct your questions to the appropriate speaker to answer.
Okay, I think that wraps it up. Thank you for everyone. Thank you to our presenters, Oliver and Rick, and thank you to all the attendees for joining us today. Hopefully we've provided some additional information to help you be more informed on the topic of tap and bottled water. Have a good day.